Today I'm talking to Hawken McEwan, Head of Compliance at DocFox. Before we go into who and what DocFox is, I would like to share Hawken's bio with you. Hawken has over 25 years experience in financial crime compliance, regulatory operations, banking operations, risk and change. Specialising in FICA and Anti-Money Laundering, Hawken is an FSCA approved compliance officer, FAIS Key Individual, and an advisor to BankSETA around AML due diligence and transaction monitoring. He holds a master's from the University of Edinburgh, a PGCE from the University of Sunderland, and is a certified anti-money laundering specialist. That is a mouthful. Thank you for your time, Hawken.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to chat with you today. I just hope I can live up to that introduction. So thank you.
You will have no doubts. First of all, can you please tell us a little bit more about DocFox, a short history and a bit of insights into exactly what you guys do?
No, absolutely. Well, DocFox was originally the brainchild of a couple of very smart people, including our current global CEO, Ryan Kainin. He studied electronic engineering, but he soon found his place in the world of solving problems using technology. So after years of building custom software for the financial industry, they discovered this enormous challenge that FICA and client due diligence presented to all of the businesses that they worked with. So the team decided this was really a problem worth solving. So we set out to build this slick, user-friendly solution that could help customers meet the requirements of FICA, but as painlessly as possible. So right now we offer software and supporting services that really simplifies FICA processes, automates it as far as possible. So collecting the right documents from clients, checking information against various databases to verify their identity, screening against international sanctions lists. And we've actually even built an in-house research team to curate what is now, I'm very proud to say, the most comprehensive and up-to-date DPEP and PIP lists of those political exposures. We've got the best database in South Africa. So I think, in short, really, DocFox just tries to make that decision-making process around onboarding customers as slick and as easy as possible while meeting the regulatory requirements. So that's our goal and our aim.
It's a huge gap that you guys are filling, most certainly.
Yeah.
Tell me, Hawken, who exactly is your clients?
It's quite interesting. Our customers tend to be business categories that are classified as accountable institutions under the FICA Act. So really companies that have been identified by the FICA as being at that higher risk of being leveraged for financial related crimes like money laundering, terrorist financing, and then they have a duty to comply with FICA. So our customer base really includes a range of businesses from wealth and asset managers, law firms, estate agents, to more recently, due to the new additions to Schedule 1, the likes of motor dealerships, high-value goods dealers and credit providers. So it really is a broad range of different types of customers.
Okay. We talk to an audience who understands FAIS and FICA. The focus within your company is on FICA compliance. There has been a lot of amendments to the FICA Act recently. Can you tell us a little bit more about these changes and why they were made?
Absolutely. I think a few changes is a bit of an understatement. There has been an awful lot of regulatory changes over the last couple of months, and I'm sure you've all been privy to the media storm around South Africa's grey listing. But these two things are actually linked. They're not coincidental. During that last mutual evaluation of South Africa back in 2019, the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, identified a number of weaknesses in South Africa's controls and the fight against these financial related crimes compared to those international standards. So really, they made recommendations for regulations and enforcements to be updated to try and bring us more into line. We had that deadline of February this year to get up to speed, to implement all of those recommendations before they reassessed us and see if we were a candidate for that higher risk grey or blacklist. I can't deny there has been considerable work behind the scenes at places like the FICA, the NPA, the National Treasury, and that has led to an increase, I'm sure you've seen in the news, of asset forfeitures, but also this raft of regulatory updates in an attempt to try and plug some of the gaps that were identified. So there has been a change to requirements, for example, around cash reporting, changes to definitions of those politically exposed prominent people, a huge drive to keep registers of beneficial owners across companies, charities and trusts, because you want to know who's behind these entities that are transacting. And of course, I think the amendments to Schedule 1 that are significantly increasing the number of businesses that now are counted as accountable institutions and have to comply with FICA. And I think that schedule amendment is probably the biggest, most interesting change, as there's now a vast array of different companies that have never even had to think about FICA, who now suddenly have to work with it and be fully compliant. But I don't think it was an arbitrary decision. I think having that broader base of information that covers these financial and non-financial institutions is really going to give the FICA and the prosecution an improved breadth of information. It's going to make them better placed to identify illicit activities, follow flow of funds, and identify those kind of typologies and really support authorities in ultimately, hopefully, prosecuting the culprits. But I mean, they're just some of the elements that South Africa needs to get out of the grey and back into colour. There's lots of things that still need to be implemented, which I think will be great. We've got the legislation, we now have to go and action them. But South Africa's a big ship, it's going to take a while to turn. But I think the biggest outcome really for accountable institutions is that level of supervision and enforcement is absolutely going to be increasing starting this year. So I think my recommendation for any institution that's accountable is be very comfortable that you're confident in your FICA compliance levels.
Yeah. What are the most common misconceptions when it comes to FICA compliance?
That's a tricky one. There's a few. We hear a lot every day. If I think of, I don't know, top three, I would say we still see intermediaries that think because they have a relationship with a bank or a product provider, they can place a level of reliance on what they're doing. Sadly, that's not the case anymore. Intermediaries actually have exactly the same requirements in terms of FICA as the banks, as the product providers, since that repeal of Exemption 4 that happened with the Amendment Act. I think the message is starting to get out there, though, as banks also look to kind of gain a level of comfort around the controls of the intermediaries they're working with. I think the next one is probably a similar story in that we come across firms that say, I get an ID, I get a proof of address, I'm FICA compliant, but I think there needs to be an understanding that FICA and certainly client due diligence under FICA is a lot more than that. It is that mandatory risk rating, that mandatory sanction screening, the mandatory establishing source of funds for transactions and matters. So if they're just doing the ID proof of addressing, then they really are leaving themselves open to some risk. And I think one of the other things that I've come across, especially more recently, is this misconception that I hear that it's fine, we outsource FICA. You know, they've got a compliance officer. But in terms of FICA, that really is a big no-no. And I think it's not deliberate. I think it's because there is some confusion. If you look at FAIS, which we mentioned earlier, it allows you to use the services of an external compliance officer. In fact, you mentioned I'm one of the FSCA approved external compliance officers. But it's very different for FICA. I can't take on any responsibility for FICA. It cannot be outsourced. And the best person really to understand the risk in your business is the business. So I think while you can absolutely ask external parties like DocFox for guidance and support, you have to have, under Section 42 of the FICA Act, a compliance function or an internally appointed compliance officer to oversee all of the requirements in the business. So absolutely, you can go and ask for help. We've got my team, the advisory team, which is attorneys, certified anti-money laundering specialists. So I think we're pretty well placed to support businesses. It's the only regulation we work with. But you absolutely have to have a counterpart inside the organization that's managing FICA for the entire firm. They're probably my top three.
Who's typically, if you don't have a compliance officer, who are typically the people in a small brokerage or advisory firm that will handle that? Would it be top management?
Yeah, so in the Act, it actually defines it has to be somebody of sufficient seniority and authority. The idea really is that if you see something, you're not going to be afraid to report it. So, you know, if you look at a one-man band, then the director, the sole proprietor, will also be your compliance officer. It's typically a director, a very senior manager within a firm, because, again, they've got that authority. They're not going to be intimidated if, you know, the CEO turns around and says, no, let it slide. They're actually going to represent FICA for the entire firm. So absolutely top management.
Why are more businesses automating their client onboarding and FICA process?
I think, as we kind of chatted about, this general trend towards more regulation, and it's across the board, it's not just FICA, we've seen it with FAIS. Yeah. I think with the increasing regulatory controls and the oversight comes that additional burden on businesses to try and figure out, how do I stay in touch with the changing goalposts while I try to run my business effectively and profitably? And looking for a FICA solution, I think, is an obvious choice. It can help automate the process, take away some of that burden. And if you look at a system like DocFox, it can really help ensure an entire team follows all the steps required easily, quickly, and maybe more importantly, consistently. Software really can just do that heavy lifting and mitigate those manual processes of validating IDs, screening your customers against all of the lists. So it's useful on the front line, but also for supervision and management. Having dashboards, having audit trails means you can see at a glance all of your clients, all of their status. So your compliance person can really have easy oversight of exactly what's happening on the front line. But I mean, that's about the company. For the customer, I think it creates a good customer experience. I think nowadays we all expect fast, effective, digital onboarding. That's the interaction we want. So I think with DocFox, clients can effectively onboard themselves, upload their own information, upload their own documents into the system from home or even with their cell phone. So as the cost of compliance is increasing, I think it just makes sense to find a solution that can save time, make for a better experience for teams and also for customers.
Is your system something that typically plugs into a CRM type of system, or is it a whole standalone system?
We've got two options. So you can have a standalone, which means you log on to a web interface and you can do everything through there. But we also have an API. So we've got a lot of clients that have an existing system like a CRM or a practice management tool, and you can use the API rather to swap data between those two systems. So you really can have the choice between both, depending however your business is set up.
Hawken, lastly, a message to our audience who is the advisors, the brokers, and of course the bigger insurance industry and financial services industry.
Absolutely. At the end of all of our training courses, and actually a lot of the webinars and presentations we do, I wrote this thing. It was probably about 2.5 years ago now, and we're still using it. And we finished with the same kind of closing line. And it is that money laundering, financial crimes are by design a subterranean crime. They're meant to be deliberately difficult to detect. But accountable institutions, firms like, watching today, have businesses to run and services to provide. And I think FICA can seem like a burden, but it really does serve a real, genuine purpose. And compliance can become part of your day-to-day, especially if you use the right tools and the right processes. So I always thought that the true financial crime superheroes are those on the front line, the people involved with the clients, the assets, the transactions, and who can use their skills, their experience and their knowledge to pick up on the often very subtle clues that something untoward might be going on. Having said that, for the majority of people, fighting financial crime is not their day job. But all of the stories, all of the headlines you read about or hear about on the news related to these financial crimes to money laundering are there because somebody in that position said something. They reported their suspicion. So I really do believe that people on the front line are the ones that can be part of making a difference, especially at the moment with grey listing.
Thank you for your time, Hawken. I learned a lot today, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. My name is Rianet, and I spoke to Hawken McEwan, Head of Compliance at DocFox. Thank you.